Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. 2 hours of open forum today. I'm guessing, I don't know, no one's assured me, but I'm guessing some groovy music because it's Thursday. We got Jim. Oh, I just got a look on Darren's face like maybe no on the groovy music. Jimmy Akin here with us both hours. Open forum, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Open forum just means open to everyone, open to everything. Ask what you'd like, whoever you are. 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin, of course, proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where tomorrow, I already know because Jimmy was with us yesterday, will be the second episode in the big two-part Loch Ness Monster series on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Yeah, and we'll be revealing why the Loch Ness Monster suddenly burst into consciousness into public consciousness in 1934. Because something very specific happened in that year that led to that.
Discovery of LSD?
Nope.
None of my guesses have paid off. Is it aliens or demons? Which is
neither.
Oh, all right. Not aliens, not demons. Well, we'll have to tune in tomorrow to find out. They drop early in the morning here in California. Wherever you are, they drop on Friday, 888.
I will say it has something to do with another famous monster.
Not Hitler.
Nope.
He was a monster, though.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't know. I just have to tune in tomorrow and find out.
Yeah.
A whole bunch. Let's see how many. We got one line open right now, so you can still dial and get in, and we'll get you on with Jimmy if you got a question. A load of people already on, so I'm feeling like going straight to the phones. Is that okay with you, Jimmy?
Sure.
All right,
That's what I'm here for.
Let's go to Colin in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, watching on YouTube. Colin, thanks for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi there. I have a question that sort of concerns the relationship between Jesus and Mary after Jesus was born. So I've heard of this concept called microchimerism, where it's essentially embryonic cells from the fetus goes into the mother and can implant in her tissue and then multiply. So essentially there's an area of cells within the mother that is genetically the infant. And this can last like decades after a baby's been born. So I guess my question is, like, does that have any implications for Mary in terms of, is she somehow still carrying Jesus possibly, like even after Jesus was born and then like even after he ascends conceivably?
Well, she wouldn't be carrying Jesus because Jesus is a person, and the person Jesus left her womb at birth, and so she wasn't carrying the person Jesus after partition, after his birth. But given that we now have evidence that the cells of an unborn child can detach and implant in the mother and remain there for extended periods, it's quite possible that Mary continued to carry cells from Jesus for an extended period. And we don't know how long that lasts, but conceivably for the rest of her life. So conceivably, Mary could have cells from Jesus in her womb today.
Like in heaven, she could still have cells of Jesus.
Yeah. No, I can't prove that she does, but it's possible that she does.
Does that have any implications considering that Jesus is God? Like, does the cells that would have gone out of him, are they still God in the same way that he is God?
God is a person, and the person Jesus is God. But if you have like a fingernail clipping of Jesus or a hair of Jesus, it would be a holy relic, but it wouldn't be Jesus. It wouldn't be God. And so I would not look at little bits of Jesus's cells that detach from his body as retaining the hypostatic union with divinity.
Colin, thank you for starting us off with a very interesting question.
And I can even cite precedent for that in Catholic tradition, because there was, for a while, there was a belief in some parts of Christendom in what's known as the Holy Prepuce, which was basically Jesus's foreskin. And it was thought that that this had been preserved as a relic. Now, I don't know anyone today who thinks that that's accurate, but when there was widespread belief in the Holy Prepuce, it was regarded as a relic, but not as Jesus himself.
Again, Colin, thanks very much for the call. Lots of folks on the line. On we go with more questions for Jimmy Akin. It's open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. Edmund in California, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Edmund, go ahead with your question for Jimmy. Nope, I didn't do it. He disappeared, but I know that was not me. How about we go back to Canada? Ava in Ontario, Canada, watching on YouTube. Ava, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. And thanks for the books that you sent me about apologetics, because they've been very helpful and I've been able to write a paper.
Hey, great, Ava. What year are you in school?
I would be in grade 10. I'm homeschooled.
All right. Well, I'm glad they were helpful to you, Ava. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you. I was talking with a Protestant, and he brought up the rapture, and I said we don't believe in the rapture because it's unbiblical, and he said that the verse where it says one shall be taken and one shall be left proves the rapture, but from what I understand, that's not the rapture, and the person that's taken is actually the one that is destroyed. Is that true?
Okay, so I would approach the subject a little differently in talking with a Protestant friend. Rather than simply saying we don't believe it because it's unbiblical, I would try to find common ground. And that's something I do in general as part of apologetics. Whenever I'm talking with someone who's coming from a different faith perspective, I try to find common ground, things that we agree on. And that has a couple of good effects. One of the things that it does is it shows that you're being nice. You know, you're not just trying to be contradictory or contrary. You're not being just confrontational. You're looking for things we can agree on. And that demonstration of goodwill will make it more likely that the person will give you a sympathetic hearing. That if they see you're a person of goodwill and you're trying to find things that we agree on, that'll make them friendlier to you. It shows you're being friendly to them. It'll make them friendlier to you. The other good thing that it does is it clarifies, if you do identify common ground, is it clarifies exactly where our disagreements are. So it identifies things that we don't need to fight about. In the case of the rapture, Catholics don't use the term rapture historically. It's a term that was developed in a Protestant context in the 19th century. So it's actually quite a recent Protestant term, and it's only found in some areas in Protestantism. It's not part of historic Protestantism. But even though Catholics have not historically used the term rapture, we do acknowledge that there's an event where believers will be caught up to be with Jesus, because St. Paul says that in 1 Thessalonians 4:17. So and that's the main passage that Protestant supporters of the rapture idea will appeal to, because St. Paul says it flat out that when Jesus comes back, we're going to get caught up to be with him and we'll always be with the Lord. The question is, when does this event occur? Because we agree there is going to be an event like this, and what happens next. And if you read 1 Thessalonians carefully, and if you especially read it in light of what Paul also says about the second coming of Jesus in 2 Thessalonians, it's clear that this event will occur at the second coming, not sometime prior to a millennium that itself precedes the end of the world by more than 1,000 years. And so the way I would tend to approach it in speaking with a Protestant friend would be to say, well, we don't tend to use that term. It's not our term, but we do acknowledge that there's going to be this event. But if you look at the text carefully, it indicates this is something that happens at the end of the world, not over a millennium before the end of the world. Now, in terms of the specific passage that he cited about one will be taken, another left, that's from the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse is Jesus's major prophetic discourse. It's a speech that he gave, or a sermon that he gave on the Mount of Olives. That's why it's called the Olivet Discourse. And it's found in 3 of the Gospels. The earliest version of it is in Mark 13. It's also in Luke 21, and it's in Matthew 24 and 25. And when you look in Mark and Luke, the occasion for the Olivet Discourse is they've just come out of the temple and crossed the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives. And as they're doing that, the disciples are commenting on the big, impressive stones that the temple is made out of and how beautiful it is. And Jesus says, well, I got to tell you guys, see all those stones? They're all going to be thrown down. There's not going to be one left on another. The temple's going to be destroyed. And so when they get to the Mount of Olives, the core disciples come to Jesus and they say, we kind of need closure on that. Can you tell us more about when the temple's going to be destroyed? And that's the question they're asking. They're not asking about the end of the world. They're asking about the destruction of the temple. And so we should understand the Olivet Discourse as not telling us about the end of the world, at least not directly, but instead telling us about the period between Jesus's day and when the temple was destroyed in AD 70. So this is already fulfilled prophecy. Now, when we go to Matthew, it's a little bit different. In Matthew, like in Mark and Luke, the scene is the same. They've just come out of the temple. Jesus has predicted it's going to be destroyed, and the disciples ask, tell us more. What's the sign that this is going to happen, that the temple is going to be destroyed? But then they also ask an additional question. And it's significant that in Matthew's version alone, there's some additional material in the Olivet Discourse. After the material that repeats what's in Mark and Luke, there are these parables at the end, like the wise and the foolish virgins and the parable of the sheep and the goats. So you have these additional parables that do apply to the end of the world. And so it looks like that's the area of Matthew's version of the Olivet Discourse that does deal with the end of the world. But that's not where one will be found in the earlier section of the Olivet Discourse, which deals with the destruction of the temple. And if you look at what Jesus is saying, he's making a comparison to the time of the flood. He noted that in the days of the flood, people were going about their business, and then the flood came and took them all away and destroyed that civilization. And Jesus is saying in the same way, leading up to the destruction of the temple, people will be going about their business, and then it will be like it was at the flood. There will be this sudden thing that happens and takes people away, and one will be taken and another will be left. Well, in context, the way to understand that would be, at least the straightforward understanding, would be that it's going to be the destruction of the war that leads to the temple being destroyed. That destruction is going to take some people away. They're going to get killed in the war. Other people will be left. They'll survive the war. And so, read in context, what this statement seems to be about is the destruction that people will experience leading up to the destruction of the temple. It's not about the end of the world. It's about events that have already taken place for our perspectives. And that's why Jesus says, when you see these things happening, let those who are in Judea flee, because Judea is where the war is going to take place. It's not something that's affecting the whole world. It's something that's affecting Judea. So does that help, Ava?
Hang on, Ava. I put you on hold for a quick second. Go ahead. Does that help you?
Yes, thank you. I'll be able to tell him that about the rapture, and it's a good idea about finding common ground, because that's what he always says to me whenever I about purgatory confession, he says, I don't believe that because it's not in the Bible. So I'll have to do that. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Ava,
Good job.
You sound like a very sharp person. Thank you very much. I hope you will call again. We got to take our break. We'll take that break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I'm a Dominican, and St. Dominic was an itinerant preacher who ran around and touched people's lives by open-air preaching. The radio opens the possibilities of doing this to the entire world in a very intimate sense.
EWTN Open Line Thursday with Father Brian Mulady. Tonight, 10 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin's our guest. Jimmy's got a new podcast starting on January 1st. It's going to be his book, A Daily Defense. It's the Daily Defense podcast. So for about 3 minutes each day, you learn new apologetics arguments. And if you subscribe to the Daily Defense podcast at the beginning, you'll be notified each day, and we'll guarantee you the best minutes you spend that day learning apologetics. Check it out over at Catholic.com. Let's see, Nate in Dallas is next. Nate, watching on YouTube. Or I should say, our old friend Nate. Hi, Nate.
Oh, that's so sweet. Happy holidays. I'm just kidding. Merry Christmas.
No, I don't take any offense when people wish me happy holidays. I think that's a very nice thing, but Merry Christmas, Nate.
I just wanted to tease a little bit. I wanted to talk about double effect. In my opinion, it seems contrary to Scripture. And the reason is, well, first, double effect, if I'm understanding correctly, comes from Thomas Aquinas from the Summa, second part of the second part, question 64. And it addresses whether or not it's okay to kill somebody in self-defense. So it seems to me that that's kind of subjective. It seems to me that his answer is saying that it's okay to do it in some cases if it calls for it, the situation calls for it. And that feels to me like an ends justify the means argument, which I thought is counter to Catholic teaching. It kind of also feels like fruit of the poisonous tree. So Aquinas kind of touches on this when he says, quote, an act may be rendered unlawful if it be out of proportion to the end. So this argument about double effect seems to hinge entirely on subjective reasoning or subjective morality. Like, if you think it's worth it, if you think that the ends justify those means. But also it seems like Jesus taught completely contrary to this. In Matthew 16, he talks about whoever wants to save their life will lose it. In Matthew 5, he talks about if someone, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I say, do not resist evil. If someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. Love your neighbor. Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you. So it doesn't seem kind of moot to me that Aquinas would say it's okay sometimes to fight back to the point of Jesus says, no, never do that, never resist evil, and also doesn't it seem like fruit of the poisonous tree or subjective morality? Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay, so there are quite a number of things there to respond to. Let's start, and I'll and you can tell me if I miss any of them. The first thing is fruit of the poisonous tree is a phrase that I'm not used to encountering in this context. You may be aware of a usage that I'm not familiar with, but the usage of that phrase that I'm familiar with involves legal doctrine, where if evidence is gathered in an improper way, then any evidence you discover as a result of that initial improper action is also to be excluded and not to be considered as evidence by the court. For example, if let's suppose I'm a police officer, and without probable cause, I violate someone's civil rights and do an illegal search of their property, and I discover a bunch of evidence that they may have committed a crime. Well, that evidence, because it was an illegal search, has to be excluded. But if after I found the evidence that they had committed a crime with my illegal search, I then went on and now had probable cause and did more searches and found even more evidence, then that evidence that I found as a result of the initial illegal search would also have to be excluded. That's the so-called fruit of this poisonous tree that I planted by doing the initial illegal search. So that's what I'm familiar with as the meaning of that idiom. I'm not familiar with it being used in this context. The law of double effect, now you said it came from St. Thomas Aquinas, and he certainly discusses it, but I don't know that he's the author of it. In fact, I'd be rather surprised if he was, because the principles had been things that people were thinking about for 1,200 years before his time, at least. And so I would be surprised if he was the person who originated this concept. It does not involve, well, let me put it this way. There's always a subjective element involved in weighing moral values. And so you're correct that because one of the conditions for the law of double effect is that the evil that you're tolerating has to be outweighed by some good, there is a weighing process that goes on. And that is inescapably subjective, since since good and evil are non-empirical values. We can't measure them with scientific instruments. And so we have to, as part of moral reasoning, make a subjective appraisal of the different weights of different things. However, that's not contrary to Jesus' own thought. Jesus himself in Matthew 23 talks about how the scribes and Pharisees would tithe even little bitty bits of their herb gardens. If they were growing mint as an herb, they would, and mint is very prominent, as you may know, CALive, in Middle Eastern cookery. But if they were growing mint in their herb garden, they would even take 1/10 of the mint and give that to the priests as a tithe. And Jesus says, good for you for doing that, but you need to pay attention to more weighty matters of the law, like justice and mercy. So Jesus himself recognizes that there is a difference in weight between different moral matters. Justice and mercy are more important than tithing 1/10 of your mint. And he expects people, including the scribes and Pharisees, to make that appraisal, even though it's a subjective appraisal. So Jesus does not have a problem with making subjective appraisals of moral situations and then acting on the basis of those appraisals. When it comes to, so you're right, there is this subjective element involved, but number one, Jesus doesn't have a problem with that. Number two, just because there's a subjective element involved doesn't mean that that it's all subjective. One of the things about the law of double effect is it does care about the means that are being used in a particular situation. I cannot, for example, deliberately take an innocent life. I can tolerate an innocent person ending up dying as a result of some action that's otherwise very important, because if for no other reason, life involves risk. And sometimes, innocent people will die as a result of that risk, and that can be tolerated. But what I can't do is deliberately kill an innocent person. And so the means, whether you're merely allowing something or whether you're deliberately doing it, is important in the law of double effect. And so the law of double effect is not simply a consequentialist, do anything if it's weighty enough. There are limits to what the law of double effect will allow you to do. It will not allow you to use improper means like killing the innocent to achieve some end. Then we come to the question to the exegetical question that you brought up about, well, Jesus says don't press your rights and, go the other mile and, turn the other cheek and things like that. And those are all true. Jesus did say those things, but we cannot read out of those a total endorsement of pacifism. One of the things that you have to do with Jesus is take the whole of his teachings in context. And there's the music, so I'll tell you more about that on the other side of the break.
Hang on, Nate. We'll be right back. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. 888-31-TRUTH is the number.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says CALive. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Little bit of groovy music for you. Thank you, Darren. It's Thursday. Jimmy Akin's here. It's Open Forum. There's some groovy music. We're having a good time here. Nate's on the line from Dallas, Texas, asking essentially whether the idea of double effect is similar to the ends justify the means. Jimmy, you were explaining that it is not.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, in the law of double effect, not any means is justified. The means itself has to be licit, and you cannot use an illicit means in order to accomplish an end. So it's fundamentally different. However, the specific point I was addressing was the teachings of Jesus, because Nate brought up some passages where Jesus says things like turn the other cheek and don't resist, someone and so forth. Now, the point I was making is you have to read Jesus's teachings and understand them in their context as a whole. You don't want to just isolate individual teachings and absolutize them as if they were all you needed to consider. And this is a good example of that, because the place that these teachings are found, the ones that Nate cited, is the Sermon on the Mount. And that's Jesus's major ethical discourse. It's found in Matthew's chapter 5-7. And even within the Sermon on the Mount, we can show how Jesus's teachings make individual points that are meant to be understood in harmony with other individual points that he makes. For example, if you look towards the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, this is in Matthew 5, Jesus at one point says, "Do your good works and let people see them so they can glorify your Father in heaven." Right? CALive?
Yes.
He says that, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But then he turns around in Matthew 6, and he's saying, do your acts of righteousness in private so that you're not doing them to get glory from men, and your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. Okay, so those two things, if you took either one of those in isolation and absolutized it, you would get an erroneous conclusion. Jesus means us to understand these in harmony with each other. So to the extent that you can do your good works in a way that brings glory to God, do so. So God gets the glory. But if you're going to be tempted to get the glory for yourself, keep it private. And so we're not meant to take either one of these teachings in isolation. And we can see that right here in the Sermon on the Mount. So what about these teachings regarding resisting other people and violence? Well, essentially what Jesus is saying is that, we should be willing to allow other people to, we shouldn't press our rights. We shouldn't always insist on having our way on everything. We should be generous people. We should be loving people, and we should be willing to tolerate it. When people do things to us that they shouldn't. But that doesn't mean that there are no limits to this. Being a nice person and not insisting on your rights does not mean being a doormat and letting someone do whatever they want to you and never resisting. Because in Luke's gospel, during the Last Supper, Jesus says, guys, how I sent y'all out and I told you not to take any provisions with you. You were going to live on the generosity of others like Blanche Dubois. Well, now the situation has changed. Now, bring the stuff with you because it's going to get harder. You're not going to be able to depend on the kindness of strangers. Bring your stuff with you. And if you don't have a sword, go buy one. Now, as I'm sure you know, CALive, you don't spank people with swords. Swords are for killing people. This is the ancient equivalent, sociologically speaking, of a gun.
Yeah.
So the equivalent in our culture would be Jesus saying, if you don't have a handgun, go buy one. So Jesus obviously did not have a problem with the disciples using lethal force in self-defense. That's exactly why he told them to buy a sword. And we similarly don't find a pacifist ethic elsewhere. Now, it can't in the Bible, either Old Testament or New Testament. Now, it can be heroic to not insist on your rights, even to the point of martyrdom, but that's heroism. You are allowed to defend yourself and to take the life of an aggressor, especially if someone else is involved. If you're the father of a family and someone's menacing your kids, well, you might choose to allow yourself to be martyred, but you've got a responsibility to protect those kids. So Jesus himself acknowledges that it is legitimate to use lethal force in self-defense, and he and St. Thomas Aquinas would be fundamentally agreed.
Nate, thanks very much for that question. We do appreciate it, and we always like to hear from you. I got to turn now, however, into the studio for a question. Somebody on
that sounds metaphysically impossible.
To turn into the studio? Oh, well, I guess I'm not going to turn into the studio.
That'd be terrifying.
Okay. I'm going to turn inward into the hi, Thomas.
Hi, Si. That's less terrifying.
Yeah. Somebody saw you on...
Dude.
What?
Whoa, that jacket.
I wondered what Jimmy was reacting to. Yeah, Thomas is wearing the cheerful Christmas jacket that makes the rounds around here at Catholic Answers. And you do look really... I think spiffy is probably the right word. Yeah, you do look Christmassy.
Spiffy, Christmassy. I love this jacket, Si.
Someone on YouTube saw you coming into the studio and said, "Here comes the Chinese spyware." Why would they say that?
Maybe because I'm bringing a question from TikTok. Which...
Oh, that's probably it. Yes, it's time for Thomas the TikTok Engine, which is we've settled on that, right? That's the name now.
I think that could
Thomas
be it.
the TikTok Engine.
I think that could be it.
Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Patent pending. All right, Jimmy. So the question I brought to you today from TikTok, which people can find our TikTok page at Catholic Answers. It's very simple. If they want to test the waters of the Chinese spyware, is can you please answer if Catholics should believe in Santa and tell their children about Santa?
Well, it depends on what you mean. There was a real historical St. Nicholas. He was a bishop from Turkey. He lived in the AD 300s, and he is reported to have participated in the very first ecumenical council that declared that Jesus Christ is God. So he was a real guy, and we should believe in him as a historical figure. Now, if you mean the fantasy version of St. Nicholas, the one that comes down chimneys and delivers presents to children in the dead of night on the bridge between December 24th and December 25th, with 8 tiny reindeer and lives at the North Pole, or in Japan lives on the moon, then, well, no, we shouldn't believe in that because that's a fantasy version of St. Nicholas. In terms of what should we teach our children about St. Nicholas, well, we can certainly teach them about the historical St. Nicholas. We can also play fun pretend games with them about the fantasy St. Nicholas, just like we watch movies with them and read stories to them, and they know that's pretend. And so if you want to play, let's pretend that Santa Claus is going to bring you these presents and stuff, well, then that certainly would be fine. What there's more of a question about is, can you lie to your children and tell them that the fantasy version of Santa Claus is real and let them eventually slowly realize that he's not? Well, that's going to depend on your theory of lying. Personally, I would have a hard time justifying lying to my children about the fantasy version of St. Nicholas, but the church has not made a definitive ruling on that question.
I just wish I'd had the forethought to say, hey, parents, you might want to turn off your radios for this one and come back.
I guess I wish you had as well, Thomas.
My apologies to the households whose Christmases I ruined.
So, I'm sure nobody's Christmas is ruined.
Just give them one of these jackets and they'll be a lot better.
The TikTok engine.
The Thomas who stole Christmas.
I know. I've become, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Is that the line?
I don't know, but it's right.
Become the Grinch.
I don't know if that's the line. I like your Catholic Answers hat. What happened to your Catholic Man Show hat? Did you?
I just cycle through.
Oh, you cycle through different hats, but
Might
you do
see it
wear
next
a
time.
hat every day.
That's right.
Never see Thomas without a hat. Thanks, Thomas, the TikTok engine.
Thanks for having me, Si.
Look forward to doing this again sometime. Let me see who's next. Thomas looks stricken. Derek in Pennsylvania. Oh, no, we're going to Bill in Texas, listening on the EWTN app. Bill, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
My question is, when a person has extreme spiritual gifts, who do they go to? Is there a person or a website that can help? Because I've run into a lot of people who have, can see and hear angels and talk to angels or all sorts of different types of gifts, and they are kind of lost, I have gone through that myself, but I've been dealing with this for 40 years, so I've already gone through the whole gamut, but I'm calling more for other people that are out there that experience things.
Well, okay, so the conventional way of handling reports of unusual experiences in a parish would be to have the pastor as the first person you'd talk to, and if a judgment needs to be made about, are these experiences genuinely supernatural or not, that would be something that would fall to the bishop to investigate. The bishop also could be consulted in terms of figuring out, what should a person do with the experiences they're having. There also are another kind of person that could be brought in would be a spiritual director, especially someone who has experience with what's called mystical theology. There are spiritual direction services, and like there's Dan Burke, for example, has a spiritual direction website that might contain some valuable resources. Also, there are people with other forms of expertise. I'm qualified, I'm certified as a paranormal field investigator, so it's up my alley, and I, occasionally assist people with situations that they're in, and help them evaluate what's going on with various unusual experiences that they have. There's not a central ministry or anything, but those are the kinds of people that you would want to talk to in figuring out a situation where a person is having unusual experiences. The pastor, the bishop, a spiritual director, or someone who has expertise in such matters.
And I will say thank you very much for that question as well, because we got to take a break now. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
So this is the first time I just put you guys on, and I'm calling in, and it is such a blessing to speak to you. And I want to say to all of your listeners that I'm thinking of you. I'm praying for you if you're out there and you are lonely, or you are sad, or you don't feel you have much to praise God about. I am praying for you that you will discover something and the Lord will really touch your heart today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and Christmas approaches, so I wish you a very blessed, ongoing, continuing season of Advent leading up to the big day, Christmas Day. We got a whole new set of programs next week, so we'll be with you all next week after Christmas, so join us then if you like, if you've got the time. We sure appreciate that you spend the time with us. Up next, we go to Windsor, Connecticut. Anne-Marie, listening on the EWTN app. Anne-Marie, thanks for calling. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thank you. I have a follow-up question on an earlier call about microchimerism.
Microchimerism,
Yep. Is it possible that science and faith meet in the dogma of the Assumption of Mary? And I say that because having the cells of baby Jesus, who is fully human and fully God within her, how could Mary not have been assumed body and soul into the glory of heaven?
Okay, so she wasn't assumed the minute Jesus was. So, Jesus ascended into heaven 40 days after the resurrection, and we know Mary was not assumed at that point because she's still present later on, and consequently, that would demonstrate that Mary. The mere fact that Mary may have cells from the baby Jesus in her, or from the unborn baby Jesus in her womb, does not mean that she has to be in the same location as him. So otherwise she would have had to have been assumed at the same moment that he was, and she would never have been able to remain on earth. And since she did remain on earth, that indicates she can be in a different place than him. So there might be a certain fittingness to the fact that, yes, she has cells from Jesus in her womb, and that makes it appropriate for her to be assumed to be with Jesus, just like the fact that all Christians are spiritually united with Jesus, and as 1 Thessalonians 4 says, we will all eventually be caught up to be with him and will remain with him. There's a certain fittingness to that, but it's not something that has to be, because we can see that it actually didn't happen immediately. But if you want to say it's fitting, then that's something you could certainly say.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Anne Marie. Thank you. Thanks very much. The number's 888-31-TRUTH. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We come back out here to California now, in Salinas, California. Christopher, watching on YouTube. Go ahead, Christopher, with your question.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Oh, we're very
doing
well.
good.
Very well, Christopher. Sorry.
Good.
Go ahead.
That's okay. So my question is, what can be a way to respond to someone who has an anti-perspective to the Blessed Virgin Mary? I know on Monday it was the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I did see in news reports that the Basilica received more than 8 million pilgrims after 3 years due to COVID restrictions. In social media, I saw a video of someone, Protestant, who was recording the pilgrims, and he was just being all very anti. He was just saying, there goes these, pilgrims going to the big basilica, worshiping the Lady of Guadalupe, and he just was being very anti-Catholic, and he was quoting John 14:6, and he was saying, may God have mercy on these pilgrims. And I was kind of like laughing what he was saying, and in the end he's like, I'm not trying to offend no one, but I hope God has mercy on all those pilgrims, but I know as Catholic, we don't worship the Virgin, we worship God, we just respect her, because I know there's the Greek word latria.
Christopher, you want to know how to respond to that kind of accusation of worshiping Mary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think you have the fundamental concept already. You've indicated we just don't worship Mary. And that's what one should do if someone is accusing us of worshiping Mary or worshiping anybody other than God. Say, actually, no, we don't. And then it's just a question of how much detail do you need to go into about that with someone. Now, since the Basilica of Guadalupe is in Mexico, an encounter on this subject. I think you mentioned the gentleman who was making the video was Protestant and a Spanish speaker, and I know some Spanish, but I don't know the details of the vocabulary in Spanish about how the equivalent terms for worship and honor work and exactly where they are similar and different and how much overlap they have. But in English, the term worship originally just meant showing honor to someone. That's why there are some British officials, government officials, who are known as your worship. Just like here in America, we call a judge your honor. And in Britain, there are certain officials, you call them your worship. And that's why Han Solo in Star Wars refers to Princess Leia as your worship. So this is just an old-fashioned usage. The word worship, its roots in English comes from worth ship. So a ship in this context means the state of something, and worth is the state of being worthy. So if someone's worthy, you give them worship. Well, that's not how the term is evolved in English. It's evolved to refer to not just giving someone honor in general, but specifically the kind of honor that is due to God alone. And so in colloquial American English, if you're going to talk about worship, it is something that you need to reserve to God alone. And we simply don't give that to Mary. We give Mary another form of honor, but we don't give her that. Now, the church in Latin developed some terminology to help us with these distinctions. These terms originally did not have technical meanings, but they came to have technical meanings so that Christians could express themselves more precisely. And the word for the kind of honor you'd give an ordinary saint is known as dulia. The kind of honor you'd give Mary, because she's a special saint, is hyperdulia, which means above regular dulia. And the kind of worship you'd give God is known as latria. Well, those are terms that the church has authorized people to use in Latin to express these distinctions. And so that illustrates that the church herself recognizes there are distinctions in the kind of reverence or honor that we give to God versus the kind that we give to Mary or other people. It's certainly the case that we are meant to give honor to other people. I mean, the New Testament even says, give honor to whom honor is due. So, and that includes your parents. Honor your father and mother. It includes church leaders. It includes holy people. And Mary is a holy person. So we are going to owe honor to Jesus' mother. In fact, in Luke chapter 1, Mary herself says, behold, all generations will call me blessed, because she gets to be the mother of the Messiah. So that of itself recognizes and she's speaking under divine inspiration at that point. So the Holy Spirit recognizes there is a role for all generations of Christians honoring Mary. Now, if someone wants to say, well, I think you're actually giving them the worship that God alone is due, say, okay, tell me why. How do you know? Are you telepathic? Can you read my mind and tell that I think about Mary exactly the same way I think about God? Because if that's what you think, you need to go practice your telepathy some more, because that's not what I believe. I believe God is the infinite creator of the universe, and I believe Mary is a finite creature. So I don't believe the same thing about God and Mary. I think God is infinitely above Mary in the order of things. And so consequently, I don't give Mary the same kind of honor. I fundamentally think about her as a human being, not as a deity. And so those are some of the things that I would point out to someone who made these kind of charges, making the appropriate adjustments for whatever language the discussion is occurring in.
Does that all make good sense to you, Christopher?
Yes, but the only thing where he was... The person in the video was indicating that he was thinking that the Blessed Virgin Mary saves, but I know that the church teaches that that's not true. The one who saves is our Lord, and that's the one thing that I would agree with the person in the video.
Yeah, and that's good. As I mentioned to a previous caller, find common ground. The more you identify common ground with someone, the more reasonable you show that you are to that person, and the fewer things you have to fight about. So, if you're talking to someone and they're saying only Jesus saves, you can say, I agree, amen. So definitely finding common ground is a good strategy.
Christopher, thanks very, very much. I'll tell you what, Christopher, I enjoyed this conversation. If you'd like to hang on, if you want a copy of Jimmy's book, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It, I haven't given out that book at all today, so I'd love to send you a copy, and it's easy for us to get it to you in Salinas, California. As I mentioned earlier, Jimmy Akin has a new podcast coming January 1st, and we've got a bunch of new podcasts around here. It's podcast season around here. So the Daily Defense podcast starts on January 1st, and that goes through the year. Little explanations of apologetic arguments each day. But Joe Heschmeyer's got a new podcast already out, Shameless Popery. New episodes drop every Thursday for Shameless Popery, and you can find that by going to shamelessjoe.com, because there are a lot of people like me who can't figure out how to spell popery. And so shamelessjoe.com. Carlo's new podcast is out, The Sunday Catholic Word. There's new episodes every Friday. And on the Sunday Catholic Word, Carlo will kind of read, he'll share with you the readings for that Sunday, but mine them, dig into them for the apologetic value that they have for Catholic apologetics. Just go to sundaycatholicword.com for that one. sundaycatholicword.com. Don't forget the Council of Trent. Still out there. Trent Horn still doing the Council of Trent. We're still doing Catholic Answers Focus. You can put those in there and find them. And of course, Jimmy's main podcast is one of the most popular documentary podcasts in America. It's Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Drops every Friday. New episode will drop tomorrow, but there's hundreds of episodes for you to enjoy. Go to mysterious.fm or just put in the words Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World in your machine and it will find it. You will find it. Lots more questions to come. It's Open Forum with Jimmy Akin next hour on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm CALive, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's open forum again this hour. I'll give you the number with the caveat that every line is full at the moment, but lines do open up, 888-318-7884. Whoever you are and whatever your question is, we'd love to hear from you, 888-318-7884. We've been so busy on the phones that I haven't even asked Jimmy about nuclear fusion yet, but I'll hang on because we got a couple of calls I want to get to right now. But the one person I wanted to ask about this nuclear fusion thing, Jimmy, and I haven't had a chance to ask you yet. We'll get to it. Kevin in Illinois, watching on YouTube. You are up next, Kevin, and I think you have been quite patient waiting. So thanks for waiting, Kevin. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, good afternoon, Cy. Thank you for taking my call. I don't know if you remember me, but I called a few weeks ago. I'm a returning member of the church, and he sent me a few books in the mail, one from Jimmy and another one from I forgot who else, but thank you for the books.
Oh, you're very welcome. Are they being helpful to you?
I've been reading a few pages. Unfortunately, I'm really busy with work and everything else, but
okay.
I received them 2 weeks ago, and I've been reading Jimmy's book. But yeah, just thought I'd let you know I received the books, and
wonderful.
Thank you for that.
Well, go ahead.
Yes. So my question would be for Jimmy. If you could give me some advice. Basically, right now I'm just in a sticky situation right now, kind of in life. I've returned back to the church and everything, and I'm trying to get my life straight and just trying to trust in God. And recently, right now, I'm having some issues with my job where I may not have a job no more, and things aren't looking good. But I'm just trying to remain positive and faithful in God, and I've been maintaining a daily prayer life. It's just hard right now, and just the question I have is how do I remain positive? How do I continue to trust in God and keep Him in faith in Him during just tough times?
Okay, so it sounds like you're doing a lot of good stuff already, and that's good. In terms of remaining positive, I would say a few things. One thing you can do is focus on the stuff that's going right currently. People who, there have been studies actually recently of gratitude, and people who have gratitude have a lot better outcomes in terms of mood and health and all kinds of things. And so figuring out what's going right in your life and focusing on that is something that can be very helpful. And there are some specific ways, actually, that people have developed as part of these scientific studies of cultivating gratitude. One way is by writing a letter to someone, not necessarily, just someone that's had a positive impact in your life. Maybe they're not even in your life right now. Maybe they're even dead and you can't send the letter. But writing a letter to someone who has made a positive contribution in your life and just saying, I want to say thank you and here's why, and talking about the things that they've done that have been good for you and why you're thankful to them, that can be helpful. Another thing, and that has been done as part of the testing, is people started keeping gratitude journals. They would make a list of 3 things every day that they were grateful for. And they did this for like a week. And they found that it improved their mood so much to take the time to consciously think, what are 3 things that I'm thankful for today? And writing them down. That after doing it for a week, a lot of the people who were in the study kept doing it voluntarily for months because it just improved their mood. It helped them appreciate the good things in their life that were going right. And so part of staying positive, I would say, might for you take the form of starting a gratitude journal and noting the things that are going right in your life and thanking God for allowing those things to go right and helping those things to go right. Another thing you can do is remind yourself that, no matter what challenge you may encounter in the short term, things are going to work out in the long term. That's part of that's one of the teachings of the faith, that we have this assurance that God will take care of us in this life, and even if we encounter difficulties in this life, which we will, the next life we're not going to have to worry about those. And St. Paul says that the next life is so awesome that the sufferings of the present life aren't even worth comparing to it. So, reminding yourself that even in this life, difficulties tend to resolve themselves. We tend to get past them. We tend to be fine. And in the next life, certainly, we're not going to have to deal with any of these difficulties. So just bearing in mind all of those things can be helpful. So can, and I don't know what your personal or social life is like, but going around and being around people who you have positive experiences with, friends or family or loved ones, staying in touch with them and doing things that take your mind off your troubles, that can be good. So can engaging in hobbies that you find. Well, even if it's you can watch a movie or listen to music or play a game. There's all kinds of things you can do that are positive and fun and that will help keep you engaged in a positive way.
Kevin, how's that?
That was some good advice. Can I ask him a follow-up question real quick, Si?
Yes, please.
Yes. So just the one issue that right now I'm having is my job. I prayed for this job before I got it, and I'm really grateful for it, but there just seems to be some difficulties with it. I'm not enjoying it, long hours, working every day, 5, 6, 7 days a week. Don't really have much time outside of work. And I'm grateful for it because it's paying the bills and it's putting food on the table, but it's just not what I want to do. But I am grateful for having a job during this time right now when a lot of places in my city aren't hiring. And I just messed up recently. Today I didn't go to work, and so there may be a chance of probably getting the termination. And so if I show up tomorrow, I get terminated. If I don't show up tomorrow, I still get terminated. So it's just what do I do here? I feel like I should just pray and just leave it up to God.
Did you call in and let them know you wouldn't be coming in today?
I called them. Well, I overslept, and then I called them up. I called HR, and I just told them I already got a final warning, and he just told me there's possible termination, and it's just a sticky situation for me. My actions have consequences at the end of the day, and this stuff happens, and it's just I don't know. It's just I feel weird and just troubled right now. It's been a tough day.
And I understand that. It's understandable that you'd feel that way. What I would suggest doing, you called in, you let them know. They said you could get terminated. I would say, number one, I'd go in tomorrow. I wouldn't say pray about it and leave it up to God whether I'm going to go in tomorrow. Go in tomorrow. You've committed to do this job, and even if you've had some failings, you committed to doing it. So go do it unless they tell you not to. So if they haven't told you don't show up for work, so show up for work. And I would, I would apologize to whoever's appropriate and say, I'm sorry about yesterday and other occasions. I've been going through a difficult time and I'm committed to this. And so I would ask you for another chance and I will do better. And then do better. So, don't be wishy-washy about this. If you got a job, it's paying your bills, you're thankful for it. Even if it's not fun, do it to the best of your ability until such time as you can find a better job. And, in the free time you do have, if you're not liking this job, start looking around. But do the best job you can in this employment situation because, number one, that's the ethical thing to do. That's the thing that'll please God. And number two, it could help you keep from getting fired. And number three, the better you are at this job, the easier it's going to be at finding another one. If you don't have a recent firing on your record, and if you've left behind a good work experience with other people who can recommend you, whatever mistakes have been made in the past, let the past be the past. go forward and do the best you can from this moment forth.
Kevin, God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for that call. I hope you'll keep calling. It's great to get a chance to talk with you. And go ahead.
And let's ask listeners to pray for Kevin and all people in similar situations.
Amen. Thanks, Jimmy. Great idea. We do have to take a break. We'll be right back. More Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
I want to talk to you about the importance of bringing the news to you every day. And we do that two ways on Catholic Connection. Firstly, we give you a newscast that I write and give to you to keep you up to date on what's happening in the world, in the church. And then we also do interviews daily to help you understand everything from a truly Catholic perspective.
Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo. Tomorrow morning, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Got another Kevin on the line, this time from Kentucky. You also have waited a long time, Kevin, and I thank you for doing so. Kevin watching on YouTube. Go ahead, Kevin, with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy. Hi, Sai.
Hi, Kevin.
I'm an agnostic, so I have no horse in this race, but I wanted to ask a few questions about the relation of James the Lesser to Jesus.
Okay.
It seems to me like the author of the Gospel of Matthew thought that Jesus and James were half-brothers sharing the same mother, Mary. James's father is identified as Alphaeus, so if they're half-siblings, then they would need to share the same mother. And then James's mother is identified by the name Mary. James is described as Adelphos, or the brother of Jesus, in a way that the other apostles were not. And Greek did have a word for cousin, but the author of Matthew chose Adelphos. I do know that Adelphos is used by Paul to describe the 500, but Matthew wrote Matthew, not Paul, so they seem to be using the word differently. Also, John wrote John, where Jesus gives away his mother to the beloved disciple, not Matthew. So maybe the author of the Gospel of John had a different opinion, but it does seem to me like Matthew thought that James and Jesus were half-brothers. This is, a problem for the perpetual virginity of Mary, so I'm sure that there's a Catholic rebuttal, and I'm just interested to hear it. Thanks.
Okay, so there's multiple different ways of approaching this. One that you will hear is an argument that James the Less is not actually Jesus's brother, but his cousin. And it's true that there is a Greek word for cousin, an epsios, but we're not dealing with ordinary Greek here. We're dealing with Greek that's being written by Aramaic speakers, and in Aramaic there is no word for cousin. You have to use a complex circumlocution like the son of my uncle or the daughter of my aunt or things like that. There's no simple way to say cousin in Aramaic, and so it was common in Aramaic-speaking Jewish circles to simply use the term brother for any family relation that is neither an ancestor nor a descendant. If someone's your ancestor, they're your father. If someone's your descendant, they're your son. And if they're anybody else, they're your brother, speaking in terms of male relatives. And so knowing that Aramaic usage, it's possible and even likely that the Aramaic-speaking authors of the Greek New Testament would have just imported that Jewish usage into their usage of Greek. We know they're not speaking normal Greek. Their Greek is different than secular Koine Greek in various ways, and it's bent in a kind of Jewish direction, and so this wouldn't be unexpected. And you'll find some Catholic apologists and other authors who will have this elaborate argument for James the Lesser being the cousin of Jesus based on calculations of his family tree. And I find that all extremely unconvincing. I do not. I think the evidence that we have from, I don't think the genealogical arguments are convincing at all, and I think they're overwrought and they depend on unprovable assumptions that are better rejected. It involves, among other things, counting how many women are involved at the burial and finding of the empty tomb, and yeah, you can read them in a way that would lead to this conclusion, but it's not the most natural reading. I reject the idea that James the Less, and by the way, we should say there is no James the Greater. That is not a phrase that appears in the New Testament. When this James is referred to as the Less, the Greek term is hamikros, and that would, if we were translating it into English, it would mean James the Short, or possibly James the Younger. So this James is either shorter or younger than the other James, who we know as James, son of Zebedee. That's how among the 12 apostles we got these two Jameses. One of them is the son of Zebedee. One of them is the short one or the younger one. But I don't think he was any kind of close relation to Jesus, and I certainly don't think he was a half-brother. The reason I say that is we have good evidence, John mentions this, for example, that the brethren of Jesus did not believe in him during his earthly ministry. They came to believe in him later. And it is therefore extraordinarily unlikely that one of Jesus's own brothers would be, whether he's an adoptive brother or a stepbrother or a half-brother or a brother German, meaning both parents in common. Regardless of what kind of brother he is, it's very unlikely that any brother of Jesus, however you want to understand that term, is a member of the 12. So I would think at most this James the Less would be a more distant relation, even if he's even a relation at all. And I understand that there is an argument to be made that he's some kind of relation based on the possible relationship between his father Alphaeus and another figure known as Clopas. Maybe they're the same guy, and maybe he's some kind of relation of Jesus. But who he's not is James the Just. James the Just is the one that's identified as the brother of Jesus. James the Less is never identified as the brother of Jesus in Scripture. This is an inference that has been made by people, but he is never called. You never have a passage that mentions James HaMikros and says he's the Adelphos of the Lord. That never happens. What you do have are passages that talk about a James who was a brother of the Lord in some acceptable first century meaning of the term. And he was known in early Christianity as James the Just or James the Righteous. And he's mentioned in the book of Acts. He was the first bishop of Jerusalem after St. Peter and the other apostles bugged out. He's also mentioned in the book of Galatians. He's even mentioned in the Gospels briefly in just a list of Jesus's brethren. But we don't have good evidence that he was a son of Mary. And we have evidence that would contraindicate this, like when Jesus entrusts the care of the Virgin Mary to the beloved disciple instead of to one of the brethren of Jesus. And John knows about the brethren of Jesus. He knows about them significantly. He talks about their beliefs. He talks about conversations they had with Jesus. So John very much knows who the brethren of Jesus were. He knows a lot about them, and yet he reports Mary being entrusted to him, the beloved disciple, instead of to one of them. And that would make absolutely no sense if these were her own children. So I tend to go with the earliest view we have on record, which dates from the 2nd century, of who these brethren were, that they were step brothers through Joseph. that he was an elderly widower who already had a family, which was why he was willing to become the guardian of a consecrated virgin. This is found in the 2nd century document, the Infancy Gospel of James. It's supported by other sources as well, and it's the earliest recorded view we have of exactly who these brethren were. I think that's what the balance of the evidence supports. And so, in short, I would say I don't think James the Less or James the Short or James the Young is a brother of Jesus in any normal sense of the term. I think there were brethren of the Lord, but they weren't children of Mary. And I think we have good evidence supporting that as well. If you'd like an extensive discussion of this, I'd recommend a book by the British, he happens to be a Protestant scholar, but the British scholar Richard Bauckham, Bauckham, called Jude and the Relatives of Jesus. He's got an extensive discussion of all of these options. And he takes, even though he's Protestant, he takes the view that I just articulated quite seriously.
Kevin, thanks very, very much. Appreciate the call. I'm going to go to San Antonio, Texas now. I'm realizing we got the line's just staying full. Listening on Guadalupe Radio, Frank in San Antonio. Thanks for your call, Frank. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate it. My question is this. In the Old Testament, there was a concept of Sheol, and then in the New Testament, Jesus introduced heaven. So why in the Old Testament was there animal sacrifice? Was it just to have a clean conscience with God? Was it to have their sins forgiven? And if they were forgiven, I don't know how to say it a better way. What was the point? But that's my question.
Yeah, so one of the things we find, and I talk about this in my book, The Drama of Salvation, one of the things we find when we read the New Testament is it's very focused on what you can call eternal salvation, which you can explain it various different ways, but go into heaven, in the afterlife, being right with God in the afterlife. That's what eternal salvation is all about. When you read the Old Testament, you read a lot about salvation, but you almost never encounter the concept of eternal salvation. Instead, you encounter what you can refer to as temporal salvation, which means salvation from the dangers that we encounter in this life, things like being saved from disease, or saved from poverty, or saved from childlessness, or being saved from warfare, from being conquered or enslaved. And those are the types of salvation that are on the minds of the Old Testament authors. So the principal reason that humans, now, if you think about what a sacrifice is, essentially it's a gift. You're giving a deity a gift. Well, why do people give gifts to each other? The basic reason, now, there can be particular variations, but the basic reason behind gift giving is it's to cultivate good relations. We even see some other species, like there are kinds of monkeys that will give each other gifts to cultivate good, like a little piece of banana or something, to cultivate good relations with other monkeys. And humans do the same thing. We give each other gifts to cultivate good relations. And so it's natural for us, because we're humans, to want to give God gifts to cultivate good relations with God. And that's and the specific reason why we want to cultivate good relations can vary. It can include the fact, I messed up, I sinned, I want to give a gift as an apology. And in the Old Testament, they lived in an agrarian culture. They had animals that were of value, and so those were valuable gifts that you could give to God as a sign of, I want to be friends, or I want your blessings, or I want your forgiveness, or things like that. But they were primarily concerned about being saved from bad things in this life. They didn't, and this changes over the course of the Old Testament, As we get later in the Old Testament, they have more of a focus on there is going to be a resurrection. Some people are going to have a good resurrection. Some people are not, and they become more concerned about that. But that's towards the end. During most of the Old Testament, they're trying to cultivate good relations with God and receive his blessings and salvation in this life. And that's why they were giving him sacrifices, including sin offerings, when they had committed a sin and wanted to be forgiven and receive his blessings in this life.
I'm going to leave it there because, again, we are all the lines are full and we are coming up on a break. So, Frank, thanks very much for that call and for that question. Let me just look real quick. We're going to have one line open when we go to this break, so you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. It's open forum. You can ask Jimmy whatever you want, and anybody can call. Just as long as you get in that queue, we'll do our very best to get you on the air with Jimmy. 888-318-7884. 884. Right back with more Open Forum right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with why we're pro-life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says CALive. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. There's a little bit of groovy music for you. But man, the lines just stay full. So back we go to the phones. We'll go right here, just north of us, Los Angeles, California. Adam in Los Angeles, watching on YouTube. You are up next, Adam. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy Akin.
Thank you. Jimmy, I'm asking this question in regards to the book that you wrote, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Mm-hmm. I was recently watching a conversation with a rabbi, and he made the comment that the Christians owe the specifically he said Christians rely completely on the Talmud to know what books are in their canon, being the Jewish Talmud, I guess. And he's a pretty well-known and
is this Tobias Singer?
Yeah.
Yeah, just never take what Tobias Singer says seriously. The dude is
okay.
I mean, I apologize, but the dude is not the most scholarly guy. I'll just leave it at that. But you had a question about, so is your question, is he right about this Talmud claim?
Yeah, I had read your book and really enjoyed it, and then I heard him say that and saw he has tons of views on YouTube, and a lot of people watch him, and I was quite shocked because I'd never heard that. I didn't see it in your book, so.
Yeah, well, Tobias Singer is a kind of cranky rabbi who loves to make provocative claims that that are non-scholarly in nature, and that he can't really back up. And this, I didn't hear him say this, so I have to issue the standard qualifier about that. But if that's what he said, that if he actually said that Christians base their canon on the Talmud of the Old Testament, well, that's just mistaken, because the Talmud. So let's talk about what the Talmud is. After the first century, at the end of the first century, the Jewish temple was destroyed. That happened in AD 70, and Jews were in a very bad state, but they rallied, and about 60 years later, around the year 132, they said, that rebellion thing worked out not good the first time, but it's going to work if we do it again. And so they rebelled again. And we had what's known as the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And it was led by a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba, which means Simon, son of the star being a messianic title. And it lasted for 3 years, and they got stomped again. And after that, there was this big fear, because Jews were not allowed to go to Jerusalem at this point, and a lot of their leadership had been killed or was in the process of being killed by Romans, and there was this fear that a lot of practical knowledge about how do we do our religion was going to perish. And so there was a guy named Judah Hanasi, which means Judah the Prince, and he started collecting and writing down oral traditions about, here's what the law means, here are the procedures we use to implement it. And he did all this around the year 200. And it became a work that is known as the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is this early collection of oral tradition that is designed to preserve knowledge from the period before the destruction of the temple. And then a number of centuries go by, and this is the first major work of what's called Rabbinic Judaism, which is the modern form of Judaism that we find, for example, in Europe. And so the Mishnah was the first major work of Rabbinic Judaism. Well, centuries go by, and people keep asking questions about, what does this mean in the law? Well, let's look at what the Mishnah said. Oh, well, this is helpful, but there are different opinions in the Mishnah, or the Mishnah itself is not entirely clear, or the Mishnah doesn't answer this question. I know what let's do. Let's write commentaries. And so there were a couple of groups of Jewish scholars, one in Babylon, one in Palestine, that wrote commentaries on the Mishnah. And the commentaries on the Mishnah are known as the Talmudim, the two Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And so that's what the Talmud is. It's a collection of commentaries that were written several centuries after the Mishnah was written, and the Mishnah was written about the year 200. So, CALive, let's test your knowledge of Christian history.
All right, here we go.
Did Christians have beliefs about the canon of the Old Testament before the Talmuds that were written centuries into the Christian era?
Of course, yes.
Of course they did. Just read the authors of the New Testament. They've got beliefs about what belongs in the Old Testament. They clearly think Genesis did. They clearly think the Psalms did. They clearly think Isaiah did. They clearly think a bunch of other works did. And that's before even the Mishnah gets written. So if, I have to put the if there because I didn't see what Rabbi Singer said, but if Rabbi Singer said that Christians owe their beliefs about the Old Testament canon to the Mishnah, he's just wrong. Now, there are some Christians, namely Protestants, and a few others during the course of Christian history who did owe their own views about the exact boundaries of the Old Testament to Jewish sources, but other Christians did not and accept books that are not in the rabbinic Jewish canon of the Hebrew Scriptures. So, I'd have to hear what Rabbi Singer said to know exactly, but if he made a statement like Christians got their Old Testament canon from the Talmud, that's at best a distortion.
And Adam, I'm going to leave that there because we do still have very full phones. But thank you very much for the call and for the question. Charles in Columbus, Ohio is next. Charles is watching on YouTube. Charles, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, I appreciate what you all do. I've been struggling with an issue, namely how can the animal food chain be reconciled with a gentle, loving God? This has happened for hundreds of millions of years before humans and has created a lot of pain. Lastly, in terms of connecting this with Christianity, Jesus also sent pigs to drown during his ministry, so I'm starting to fear this kind of callousness towards animals is reflecting God's character, which is frightening to me. I hope it's not the case, but I would like some insight into the issue. Thank you.
Well, so we want to be a little careful here because there's a balance to be achieved in our regard for animals. On the one hand, animals are God's creatures and they do have feelings and we need to be sensitive to those. On the other hand, they're not human beings and we shouldn't treat them as if they were. So, if you have a human suffering 10 units of pain and you've got a pig suffering 10 units of pain, those are not equal. It is not simply a matter of pleasure pain calculus that gives an entity its value. Humans are more valuable than pigs are, for example. So there's a bit of a balance, and it's easy for people to either become very callous towards animals or to become super empathetic to them in a way that they treat them as humans and exaggerate aspects of their character, which are just not there. God, of course, has a realistic perspective of animals because he's omniscient. He knows everything and he has accurate knowledge of everything he created. So he recognizes that animals do have value and that humans have more value. We see this, for example, when Jesus says to humans, you are worth many sparrows. So he acknowledges sparrows have worth, but humans are worth many times what a sparrow is worth. Now let's apply this to the question that you raised, Charles, about the food chain. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says that, so this is an expression of Catholic teaching, it says that God created the world in a state of journeying until it reaches its final consummation. And as part of that journeying towards its ultimate goal, there is this process by which you have the appearance of new life forms and the disappearance of other life forms. St. John Paul II in his catechetical audiences talked about this. He cited the proverb, the death of one is the life of another. If a lion eats a zebra, well, it's bad for the zebra, but it's good for the lion. And so God incorporated this into his plan, and it's something that he's ultimately going to bring good out of. That's one of the things that we're assured of. This is also in the Catechism. It's part of the Christian faith that that God would not allow an evil unless he was going to bring about an equal or greater good. Now, one of the ways So this is essentially what we're dealing with here is essentially a subcase of the problem of evil. Why does God allow evil? Well, why does he allow it in humans? Now, we know the ultimate answer is because he's going to bring good out of it. But why does he allow it in humans? Because we go through, bad stuff. Let's suppose I'm an innocent human being. I've been kidnapped, which is bad. I've been carted off to a jungle, and I've been dropped in the middle of a jungle, so I have to fend for myself, and I'm out walking in the jungle, and a lion attacks me and eats me. Okay? That's bad for me. I've just become the food. Well, so I've become lion chow, and God allowed that to happen, but what's going to happen with me? God's not, this happened to me innocently. I didn't deserve this. Someone kidnapped me and dropped me in lion country. Well, so God will make it up to me. As St. Paul says, and as I frequently quote, the sufferings of this life are not worth comparing to what God has laid up in store for us. So it doesn't matter that I became lion chow at the end of my life here. Number one, I had a lot of good times before that lion incident, and that was all good stuff. And number two, God can make it up to me in the afterlife, and will, in fact, make it up to me in the afterlife. So even though, yes, I experienced something that was unpleasant, that wasn't the beginning or the end of the story. God had good for me before the lion encounter, and he's got good for me after the lion encounter. Now, what can we learn from that by way of application to the situation of animals who suffer innocently? Well, okay, just like I had a lot of good times before I became lion food, if I'm a gazelle and a lion eats me, I probably had some good times as a gazelle. And all that good life as a gazelle before I get eaten by a lion, which is going to be like a few minutes of unpleasantness, all that good life I had before I get eaten by the lion, that may counterbalance the fact I got eaten. If I'm let's say, I don't know what the lifespan of gazelle is. Let's say they live for an average of 5 years in the wild, and then they may get eaten by a lion. Well, I had 5 years of good life before I had 5 minutes of unpleasantness with the lion. I'm not going to say, hey, God, you were cruel and unfair to me. You gave me a bunch of good stuff, assuming I'm a lion that has a gazelle that has the ability to conceptualize all this. I'm not going to accuse God of being unfair to me. He gave me 5 good years of life, and I went through this 5 minutes of unpleasantness at the end of it. That's a fair trade. Now, for a lot of Christian thinkers, but not for all, that's the end of the story. Because in the view of a lot of Christian thinkers, animals don't have afterlives. But that's a theological opinion. That is not church teaching. And there are other Christian thinkers who are open to and even believe in the idea of animals having an afterlife. I did an episode of Mysterious World a while back where I reviewed the arguments against animals having an afterlife, and I concluded they're not impressive. And there are evidences for animals, or at least some animals, having an afterlife. You can go back and listen to that episode of Mysterious World if you'd like more information on it. Just Google Jimmy Akin Mysterious World Animal Afterlife or Dogs Go to Heaven or something like that, and it'll come up. But if Christian thinkers of this sort, who included C.S. Lewis and Peter Kreeft and me, are correct that animals have an afterlife, that opens up the same possibilities for the animal problem of evil as it does for the human problem of evil. Namely, God can give them a glorious future, or at least a better future, that makes up for anything they suffered in this life. So I think that there are solutions to the problem of evil, both for animals and for humans. Exactly the particulars of why God allows us to suffer can be a mystery that we won't have the answer to in this life, but we can see the principles that make it understandable why God would allow suffering and how he will ultimately bring good out of it, and how he will not allow us to innocently suffer without being compensated.
That is a great question, Charles. I hope that the answer was helpful to you. Now we got to go to a break, so I'll say thanks, and we'll get to some more calls for Jimmy Akin, open forum today on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN Global Catholic Network is the largest religious media network in the world. 11 global TV channels, English and Spanish radio networks with over 500 AM and FM radio affiliates, one of the largest Catholic websites in the world, dozens of podcasts every week, social media, electronic and print news services, and EWTN Publishing. EWTN is the global Catholic network. For more about EWTN, visit EWTN.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and still just lots and lots of folks on the line with questions for this open forum hour. So let's go to Tonine, somewhere here in California, watching on YouTube. Tonine, hang on a quick sec. Are you there with us?
Yes.
Well, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
First of all, I have to tell Jimmy I totally fell for the man-eating koala bears. It was great. It was a great episode.
The drop bears. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, up to the last minute, it was just hilarious. But my question is, how do I respond to Protestants when they wonder why we pray the rosary? Is there evidence in the Bible for it? That sort of thing.
Well, so there are a number of things one can say. It's going to depend on the approach that the particular Protestant you're discussing this with has. I mean, like if they're demanding everything needs to be... Well, I know, but it's going to depend on the individual. So, for example, if they're demanding, okay, I want to see scriptures that prove that we should be saying the rosary. Well, we can't give you that. There aren't scriptures that provide proof that we must do this as Christians. And that leads us to a discussion then of the doctrine of sola scriptura, which is the doctrine that they would be employing in insisting on biblical proofs for this. I'd want to talk to them about, okay, I'll give you some passages that show the principles that we're using in the rosary, but in terms of this whole idea of does it even need to be in Scripture, well, that's something we should talk about separately. That's a whole other topic. We should talk about sola scriptura, because guess what? Sola scriptura cannot be proved from Scripture alone. Sola scriptura is not in the Bible, and therefore it refutes itself. So you want to reconsider this principle. In terms of passages that support aspects of the rosary, well, so let's look at the Hail Mary. The Hail Mary starts with two lines that are quotations of Bible verses. So the first part of the Hail Mary is just quoting Scripture. The last part of it, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. CALive, is there anything wrong in that? Is there anything a Protestant ought to object to? I mean, if Mary was right here in the room with us, physically, could I say, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death? Is there anything wrong in that prayer request?
Not that I can find.
Yeah, I can't either. And as long as it's a theologically educated Protestant who realizes Mary is holy and the mother of God, and that we're sinners, and that it's good to pray for sinners both now and when they're dying, well, then they shouldn't object to it either. So it looks like we've got in the Hail Mary itself, which is the principal prayer of the Rosary, it's all fine. What are the other prayers? Well, the Apostles' Creed, Protestants ought to agree with that. The Our Father, Protestants ought to agree with that. The Glory Be, they ought to agree with that. They say that themselves frequently, even though it's not in the Bible. So it looks like the fundamental content of the Rosary is all good in terms of what you're saying. So that leads us to, is it a good thing to ask Mary to pray for us? Well, we don't have a passage saying that, but we do have a lot of passages that indicate it's a good thing for Christians to pray for each other. And Mary's a Christian, and so if it's reasonable to ask other Christians to pray for us, it would be prima facie, or on the face of it, reasonable to ask Mary to pray for us. And you would then need to provide some argument why that wouldn't be the case, because we know that the Scripture is in favor of Christians praying for each other, and so that would support the idea of asking Mary to pray for us. Now, there's more that can be said about all this, and I don't have time on the show to review every aspect of the praying to saints question. But if Tonine, if you go to Catholic.com and type in praying saints, Mary, Rosary, we got a bunch of resources online for free that'll help you out and give you some additional details to think about and to use in your conversations on this subject.
Tonine, thanks very much. I want to get to Greg's question because it has a very Christmassy feel. Greg in Denver, Colorado, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Go ahead, Greg, with your question for Jimmy.
Oh, thank you so much for taking my call. I love your show, and I love all the work that you do, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
My question was about not the angels, but when the angel came to the shepherds, what were the demographics of the shepherds? I recently read something about Mishnah prohibiting private flocks around the city, so that would indicate that possibly the shepherds were temple priests and tending the temple flocks. Jimmy, your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, so I would, number one, I need to see the passage in the Mishnah that discusses this and see exactly what it says. But assuming it says that, the city it's going to be talking about is Jerusalem, not Bethlehem. Bethlehem is like 5 to 6 miles away from Jerusalem. And so I would not, and when there were regulations about what you could do around the city of Jerusalem, it was, concerned with its holiness and the presence of the temple there. So Bethlehem is regarded as another city. It's some distance from Jerusalem, and I would not expect this regulation to apply in Bethlehem. Also, even if this did apply, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the shepherds were priests, because shepherds could have servants who were not priests, and we see that in the New Testament. For example, when Jesus has been arrested and taken to the house of the high priest, John and Peter, the beloved disciple, and Peter follow him, and John gets right in because the high priest knows him personally. But Peter gets blocked by the doorkeeper girl because he's not a familiar face at the high priest's household the way John is. And John has to intercede with the doorkeeper girl to get Peter in. And so we see right there, the high priest had a servant who wasn't a priest because the girl's not a priest. So even though there were lots of priests at the time, there was, according to our best estimates, around 8,000 priests in Israel at this time. And that meant they had to divide the temple duties up really microscopically smallly. But they could have servants watching their flocks doing other stuff, even though the servants weren't priests. So I'd have to see the passage in the Mishnah I suspect it would not apply to this area, and if it did apply to this area, I don't think it would mean that the shepherds had to be priests.
Greg, thank you for that shepherd question. As we approach Christmas, Jimmy Akin, thank you very much for 2 very fine hours.
My pleasure. This is my last time on for this year, so Merry Christmas, everybody.
Hey, Merry Christmas, Jimmy. We'll see you next year. And I don't remember who we got on tomorrow, but I think Rose Sweet's coming in. Is Rose Sweet going to be here? And somebody else really good. Someone, who? Oh, the Catholic Man Show guys will be here. All right, we'll see you then, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.